Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. Today I want to show you how to set up your own home gaming console. So this is going to be an emulation machine running a special operating system that's going to be something that you could put in a living room environment. I made a few videos very similar to this over the years, but it's always good to check in periodically to see how everything works and whether or not the process has changed. And by and large, it's still the same process, but it is also very impressive what kind of performance you can get at different price tiers nowadays. We're going to try to be as cheap as possible with this one. We're going to start with a $200 mini PC, but I'll talk about some other options. And if you've got an old one laying around, an old PC or a laptop, that's all going to work too. So in this video, we're going to talk about all the tools that you would need to get set up and do the actual configuration to make sure everything is running smoothly. We got a lot to cover, so grab your favorite snack and drink. Let's go ahead and dive in. And as we get started, one quick note, I've got a whole written guide listed on my website, which will also be linked down below. So if you have any questions or you want to run through it at a different pace, then that's what I would recommend checking out. I do go a little bit fast in these videos, and that's because I expect that you can also consult the written guide if you get stuck at any point. Let's start with the tools, and number one, you're going to need a PC. And in this example, we're going to use this one, the GMK Tech G10. This one's going to cost about $200 new with 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs of internal storage. The processor on it is the Ryzen 5 3500U, not the greatest processor in the world, but I think it's pretty decent for this price point. And of note, this company did send it over for this project, but like with all my videos, they're not going to see this ahead of time. No money was exchanged in any way, and all opinions are my own. It is worth noting that if you go directly on their website, they also sell the G10, but in a bare bones configuration for $140 with free shipping. This one's not going to come with its own hard drive and RAM, but if you've already got those laying around, then this might be an easy fit. Now, the reason why I wanted to test this one was, number one, this is the cheapest Ryzen CPU that you can find new right now, so I just wanted to see what performance is like, but then also the I/O on this device is very good. For example, we've got two USB-A ports here on the front, which means that we can plug in controllers or other peripherals very easily. We've got a few options on the back, including a USB port here for its power input, but then also a Type-C port, and then another USB-A port, Ethernet, HDMI, and of course DisplayPort. So I think in terms of being a very small retro console that has all the plugins that I need, it does get the job done. The second reason why I wanted to use this G10 in particular is because the top comes right off without needing any tools, which makes it really easy to access. So we've got our SSD right here. This is going to have Windows on it out of the box, but we've got space for a second SSD right here too. So this is where we're going to put our custom operating system that's going to be based on Linux and made for retro gaming. We can also access the RAM right here, but honestly, I think that 16 gigabytes of DDR4 2666 RAM is probably going to be enough. And so that's why I picked the G10, is because I like the small form factor, I like the I/O, and the fact that it's easy to access everything internally, which just makes this project that much easier. Now, at around that $200 price point, we do have other options as well. The 3500U is probably the cheapest you'll find from Ryzen, but you can also get Intel chips for pretty cheap too. They have what they call the N series. You can find the N95, N100, N150, and these will usually range between like $175 and $250. And these Intel chips do a pretty great job of emulation in particular, so I think this is a good way to go if you want to have a similar setup to what we're doing here today, but you want to stick with Intel. And if you're willing to spend more money, you can find better options. For example, at around the 300 to 350 level, you can get something around the 5000 or 6000 series from Ryzen, which are going to give you a lot better performance too. And I would say if you're just looking for an emulation console, the cap right there is probably going to be something like the Ryzen 7 H255, which is a chip that I've tested previously, and it usually goes for around $550. This will emulate just about everything. So in terms of what to expect with the G10 model that we're using for this video, I would say that it's going to be excellent for retro gaming in particular, even upscaled to 1080p, and you will be able to play most PS2 and GameCube games too. Your retro systems are going to play absolutely fine, no problem, and same thing with the 3D based systems. So if you think about something like PS1 or Dreamcast, all of these will work fine, again, upscaled to about 1080p, sometimes a little bit higher. For example, with Dreamcast, I'm running this at 1440p and it's running great. If you want to play PSP, that's going to be an excellent fit as well. You can play these at a 4x resolution upscale with just about every single game, so that's going to be about 1080p too. When it comes to GameCube, I would recommend using a 2x resolution upscale. Most games are going to play absolutely fine like that, and that's going to give you somewhere a little bit less than a 1080p resolution. It still looks great on a bigger screen. Unfortunately, PlayStation 2 is a bit more hit and miss. Most games will play just fine at a 1.5x resolution, which is around 720p, but there will be some games that you'll have to play at a native resolution, and even then, there will be a couple, like God of War 2, that kind of struggle with the CPU. It's also worth noting that the setup that we're going to do here today will also give us access to our Steam library within this retro gaming operating system. So if you want to play some lightweight PC titles, you can do that as well. I actually spent a few hours testing the G10 with PC titles on Windows before I even started up this retro gaming project, and I will say that I was impressed with how well it plays 2D indie games on PC. For the most part, if it's a lightweight game, I would say that you can play it at a 1080p resolution with sometimes medium or low settings. I will say that if you are looking for something specifically for PC gaming, you probably got to spend a little bit more than $200 for a mini PC. It's usually the $300 options that are going to give you more titles that you can play, but if you're going to be sticking to 2D titles only, then the G10 seems to do pretty well. To give you an idea of what the upper limit was in PC gaming with this machine, I could play games like Hades 2, but it would dip down in frame rate below 60 frames per second. Still playable, but a little bit sluggish. Other games that have a 3D engine, like Risk of Rain 2, even though it is kind of a lightweight game, I could only get it running at about 35 frames per second on average, and that's at 1080p very low settings. Other games like Ori and the Will of the Wisps were just chugging. I tried to put it to 720p in low settings. It looked kind of miserable on the display. It just looks so muddy, but even then it just could not stay at a stable 60 frames per second. So yes, some of these harder to play games just aren't going to work. But thankfully, PC gaming in particular is not the purpose of this project. We're going to try to play the old classics with a couple 2D and lightweight games thrown in. So now that we've talked about various PCs that you can use, let's talk about some of those other tools. Number one, you're going to need a keyboard and mouse. Now, any standard keyboard and mouse is going to work fine, but I also like these little ones that are USB connected just because they're going to be really handy with certain parts of this project later on. The one that I primarily use is $30 and it's never steered me wrong. And so this is the one that I would recommend. It's a little bit older, but it still works pretty well. Next, we're going to need some way to store the operating system that we're going to run on this device. Now, this thing will come with its own drive. It'll come with Windows on it, but we're not going to mess with Windows. We're going to add something to it on top. The operating system that we're going to use is called Batocera, and it can be installed on just about anything as long as you can launch it on your PC. So in this example, I'm just going to take a second hard drive and put it right here, but you could also use other options. For example, if you've got an external drive like this and you can boot from this drive on your PC, then you could just have everything on this thing and then plug it into your PC and then boot from that. You could even do the same thing on a micro SD card, plug this into your computer and then boot it from this instead. But personally, I think that the fastest and the most convenient way is to just use another hard drive. Now you can find M.2 drives everywhere. They're going to be on Amazon and, different storage and different companies and whatnot. This is probably the best you can get, something from Samsung with the 990 series, and this is 1 terabyte. So this is kind of overkill, but a good example of what you could buy if you want it. For this project, I've got an old 512 gigabyte SSD lying around, so we're going to use this. But of note, I do recommend getting a heatsink for your hard drive, and that's because it gets a little bit hot as you're running it. This is the one that I picked up on Amazon. I'll leave all this stuff linked down below, but essentially it comes with a bunch of thermal pads as well as the actual heatsink itself, and then some rubber bands to hold it into place. So you just take your drive, you put the thermal pad on there, then you put the heatsink on top, and then you hold it into place with the rubber band, and that's it, you're good to go. From there, it's just a matter of taking your SSD and then plugging it into the slot right there, and then the SSD is going to come with its own screw. They're all a universal size, and so you just want to screw it in place. So there we go, super simple. We've got our Windows installation right here, and then we're going to put our Linux one on the next one, and that's really about it. Next up, you're going to want a controller to navigate through the interface, and I've got 2 recommendations here today. So the first is called the 8BitDo Ultimate 2. This one kind of shaped more like an Xbox controller, but has a nice classic style D-pad on it. Same thing with the face buttons too. So this one kind of has a retro feeling, but a little bit more modern in overall shape. My other recommendation is the 8BitDo Pro 3. So this one kind of looks like a Super Nintendo controller, but with like PlayStation style grips and analog sticks as well. And so this one's kind of a hybrid as well, but more D-pad focused. So I think this one's probably better for pure retro gaming. The reason why I like these two is because they come with USB-C dongles. So you can plug this into your PC without having to connect via Bluetooth or anything. In fact, these also come with their own wireless chargers too. I'll leave my reviews to each of these linked down below so you can read more about them, but they're generally going to be somewhere between like $60 and $80 per controller, but I think they are excellent. And then finally, the other thing I recommend is some sort of way to transfer game files over to Batocera once we have it set up. And I usually use a flash drive or an external hard drive. So the idea here is that I have my ROM library stored on this thing. So all my NES games, Super Nintendo games, all that stuff. And then what I'll do is once I've loaded up Batocera, I will plug this in and then I will copy the games from here over onto the internal hard drive that we already set up. There are many ways that you can add games to your machine, but I've always just found that to be the easiest one altogether. Okay, so now let's actually talk about the installation of Batocera, and before we even jump into that, we've got one settings configuration that I highly recommend for the GMK Tech G10 if you pick this one up. And for this, what you want to do is the moment you start up the machine, press the escape key on your keyboard a bunch of times until you get to this screen. This is called the BIOS screen. And on that front page, you will see an option that says Power Limit Select. And by default, it's going to be Balance, which is going to give you, a nice mix between cooling and performance, but it does limit your performance quite a bit. And so I do recommend changing this from the balance to the high performance mode, and then going over to the Save and Exit tab, and then save your changes and exit. And this is going to save it at the BIOS level, which means it's going to work both on Linux as well as Windows. So no matter what we're running, this is going to give us the best performance, and I recommend it if you are going to use this PC. So now let's talk about the installation process of Batocera itself. I'm going to make a couple assumptions as we dive in. Number one, you've already started up your PC, you have logged into Windows and everything else, and then you have a web browser that allows you to go to batocera.org. And once you're here, you're going to see an option right there on the front page to download the latest version. This will take you to the download section, which is going to show you all the different ways that you can install this. We're going to use the top left option, which is just using it for a computer. The file itself is going to be a couple gigs, so it might take some time to actually download, but once you're done, we are good. Now that Batocera file is a disk image file, and we're going to flash it to a new hard drive, which is that drive that we added here earlier. And to do this, we're going to use a tool called Raspberry Pi Imager, and this is basically just a flashing utility that is usually used for Raspberry Pi devices. This tool, like with everything else, is linked in that written guide that I talked about earlier, and all we have to do here is first go to Choose Device. At the very bottom, there's an option called No Filtering, so select that, and then next we're going to choose the operating system. It's going to give us a bunch of options, but we want to go all the way down to the bottom and choose Custom. From there, a Windows dialog box is going to open up and ask you to find that image file, and it's probably going to be in your Downloads folder like this. Finally, the third option is to choose storage. When you first open it up, chances are you're not going to see anything unless you're installing this on a microSD card or a flash drive. So at this point, you want to go down to the bottom where it says Exclude System Drives and uncheck that. That's going to show all the drives, and we've got two options here. The bottom one is mounted as our C drive. That's going to be our Windows machine, so we're not going to touch that one. Instead, we're going to take the D drive. That's that other hard drive that we added. Once you have that lined up, you can click on Next. It's going to ask if you want any OS customization settings. We're going to say no. And then finally, it's going to say, hey, we're about to erase everything on this machine. Are you sure you want to do that? We're going to hit, yeah, man, I want to do it. And from there, it's going to write that Batocera image to our M.2 drive that we installed just a few minutes ago. This will also take a couple minutes to run through, but after that, we are now ready to boot into that new drive. Now in a second, I'm going to show you how to dual boot, and you can boot into two drives at once, but I'm also going to give you a little bit of a secret. Once you have done all of this stuff and you power down your machine, you can just remove your Windows drive and then put this one in its place. So it only has the option to boot into Batocera. And that's honestly what I do most of the time. So that way I don't have to worry about, is it going to boot into Windows? Is it going to boot into Linux? It's only got one option, and it's going to be my retro system. It's all really going to depend on how much you plan on swapping between Windows and Linux. Personally, I'm only going to use this thing as a retro machine. So this is the only drive that I need. So I'm going to make this one my primary drive and put it right here. Now, if you want to keep Windows, but also boot into Linux, we're going to do that next. So the easiest way I've found to do that within Windows is to open up the Windows menu by pressing the Start button and then typing in the word Recovery Options. And that'll bring you to this settings menu. And under Recovery Options, there's an option that says Advanced Startup. And you can see it says Restart Now. So we're going to tap on that. It's going to ask, do you really want to do it? We're going to hit the Restart Now button. From there, your PC is going to restart itself and you'll get this dialog box right here. We're going to go down to use a device and then you should see a bunch of different hard drive options. We're looking for the one that says Batocera, so you can choose that one. From there, it'll restart the device again, but then boot into Batocera and then you should be good to go. Another way you can do this is directly through the BIOS. So as soon as you start up the machine, you would press Escape key on your keyboard again to come into this dialog box. And then again, under the Save and Exit tab, there's going to be an option for UEFI OS or for Batocera, and so you would choose that one instead, and then it'll boot into that instead of Windows. So you've got a few different ways of getting into Batocera. You can go through the BIOS or through the recovery options in Windows, or you can also just force it to only go into Batocera by removing your Windows drive if you've got something like the G10, which is really easy to access. Okay, now that we are booting into Batocera, let's do a quick run through of all the settings configurations that I recommend when you're first getting started. Number one, make sure that your controller is plugged in, then press Start to bring up the main menu. First thing I like to do is go down to the sound settings and then turn off the front end music. It'll have a bunch of background music playing, and I personally just like to have it silent, but it's all going to be up to you. After that, I like to go into the controller settings and then under controller mapping, and what you can do here is map a new controller. Now, out of the box, most of these controllers are going to work fine, but it's always good to just make sure that all the buttons are configured exactly the way you want them. So even if the buttons seem to be working okay, it only takes a second to just run through here and verify that yes, all your buttons are okay. Now once you get to hotkeys, I recommend using the select button. You can press that plus a combination of other buttons that will allow you to do different things within the Batocera operating system. We'll talk about that later. Next, I recommend going into the network settings and connecting it to your home network. Now if you've got an Ethernet cable already plugged into the back of your computer, no problem, it'll already connect. But if you want to use Wi-Fi, your device likely will have support for it, so you can just connect to your home Wi-Fi too. Once you've added all those credentials, just give it a second back out of the menu and you should see something on the top right, like you're seeing here, that will show a network connected option. And now let's go down to the update section and go into the themes downloader. And this will allow us to see a bunch of different themes that are available for this device, and you can then download them directly. So I like to think of this as kind of shopping for a new theme, and there's plenty of good options here. We're going to stick with Artbook next. So once you start downloading that, you'll see it added to the queue. It might take a moment to download and just kind of let it go through and do its thing. Now, once your themes have been downloaded and installed, you can go into the user interface settings, then go into theme set, and here you should see a bunch of different options. Like I mentioned, we're going to do Artbook next. So after I select that, you can press the B button a couple times to back out, and so this is what our menu looks like now. Okay, so now that we are set up with at least getting Batocera working and a theme that looks pretty good, now let's actually add our games and then do our configuration after that. So for this section, I recommend using a keyboard and a mouse. We're going to use Batocera's built-in file browser, and for this we need to plug in that keyboard, then press the F1 button when you're in the main menu like this. That's going to bring up this menu right here. Now, unfortunately, it's kind of hard to see the file browser by using my screen capture right here just because the icons are so small, and unfortunately, there's no way to make them larger or change the scaling as far as I can tell. So I'm going to have to zoom in at certain parts just to make sure that you can see what I'm doing. So starting at the top left, you can see that we have a bunch of different folders to choose from. We've got one called Share. This is going to basically include everything. And then we have shortcuts to both our BIOS and ROMs folders. These are going to be internal in that storage of our Batocera hard drive. And so at this point, we just need to take our own game files and then drag and drop them into the BIOS and ROMs folders for all the games that we want to play. So the way that I do this is I have my external drive called emulation, and within that, I've just got all of my games stored in one. So I've already plugged that into this computer, and if I go to it here, you can see that yes, I've got a BIOS folder that I've made already. I've got a games folder that has a bunch of ROMs in it that I use for testing. So the idea here is that I just need to take some of these files and then copy them over into the ROMs folder for whatever system I'm using. So let's use something like Game Boy as our example. So I've got a bunch of games here. I've also got additional stuff like a media folder. I don't really need to move that media folder over, but I want to move over all the games. So I'm just going to select all, and then I'm going to unselect this media folder as well as this game list, which I don't need. But all these games I do want to move over. So I'm going to right click here and hit copy. Now I'm going to go over to that ROMs folder in the internal Batocera hard drive, and you can see there's a bunch of folders here. And so you just basically have to find the folder that corresponds to whatever game you're going to be pasting into and then paste them here. Now I've already done this, and so you can see that all the games are here already, but yeah, all I would do is right click and hit paste and we would be good to go. And so this is going to be by far the most tedious part of the entire process. You're going to need to have your own hard drive with all install your games on it, and then you need to copy and paste them into each of their respective folders. And depending on the size of your library and the number of systems that you want to use, there's going to be a lot of copy and pasting done. I think the best thing you can do is just organize your games on your own hard drive first. That way it's pretty easy to just copy and paste everything over. Now the BIOS folder is a little bit more tricky because these are going to be system files that are required to run certain systems, and not everyone is going to require them, but some will. Now, like with ROM files, BIOS files are copyrighted, so I'm not going to point to anywhere that you can get them. You're on your own to find them, but I'll give you a list right here of all the different files that I personally use and the specific names for them. So really what I recommend is if you plan on playing any of the systems listed, then find these BIOS files and add them to that BIOS folder that we were showing a second ago. And one other note is that certain systems require you to put them in a specific folder. By that I mean DC for Dreamcast and then PS2 for PlayStation 2. So when you have those BIOS files, put them in that folder as opposed to the general folder here. But in a nutshell, that is how you install your games. Throw your BIOS files in the BIOS folder, and then in the ROMs folder, find the system that you want to add games to, and then copy and paste them over from a flash drive or an external hard drive. Now, before we leave this very small browser, let's go over to one other section. This is the application section right here. This will allow you to go in and make configurations to any of these standalone emulators. For example, you want to jump into Dolphin and make some configuration changes. You can do that here. For the most part, Batocera already pre-configures everything, and you can also access it through Emulation Station, which we'll do in a moment. But if you need to get to the main interface, this is how you would access it. Now, while we're in here, we're going to open up this Flatpak config app. This is going to allow us to install external apps directly in Batocera. And once you have this open, the first thing you want to do is go in here into the search menu and then type in the word Valve. That's going to bring up the Valve Steam app. From there, you can just click on this green button that will install it. That's going to install the Steam client for us so that we can play Steam games in Batocera as well. And Batocera has made this very easy over the years. Now you just have to install this one launcher and everything else will work okay. So once you've got that installed, you can go ahead and close out of the application here and then go up to File and then go to Close Window. This will bring you back to the main menu, and now we're ready to actually make some configurations now that we have our games. So first thing, press the Start button, go into the main menu, go into Game Settings, and Update Game List. This is going to update all the games in case you just added them to the system. Now press Start again, and let's go back into the game settings, and here we can make some adjustments depending on what you prefer. So first, let's talk about retro achievements. These are pretty self-explanatory, like trophies and PlayStation, and you can turn this on and then you can add your username and password right here. You can get a free account at retroachievements.org. And so this is going to track all of your gameplay and then allow you to get achievements if you hit a certain milestone. It is worth noting for retro achievements to work, you do have to have your device connected to the internet, but really that's about it. Okay, next we're going to go into the BIOS settings. So by default, this is going to be turned on where it's going to check your BIOS files before running a game. And this is a helpful thing if you don't have any BIOS files, but sometimes it'll give you a warning even if you've got a proper BIOS installed. So I like to turn this one off. And then if the game doesn't boot, then I know that, yeah, I've got some sort of issue with my BIOS, and then I'll add a new file. Next, under save states, I like to turn on auto save load. This means that it's going to save the game when I close out of it, and then it'll load it up when I start it up again. Going further down, I do like to use for a game aspect ratio the core provided one. Now they will have a custom configuration by default, and that'll work pretty well with certain bezels, but I found that in general when playing it on a television, I like to use the core provided option. So my recommendation would be that if you start up a game and it looks like really small and weird, then go back and change this one. Instead of custom, make it core provided. That usually will fix it. Under the game rendering and shaders, you can go and set up a shader set. For example, if you want to have like a curvature or like an old retro CRT look, you can establish that here right now if you'd like. Personally, I like to do this on a per system basis. We'll talk about that in a moment. Now, under the decoration section, I like to use the performance heads-up display. This basically just allows me to see the frames per second as I'm running. Again, not necessary, but I think it's pretty helpful. And finally, within the game settings, the other thing I recommend checking out is the per system advanced configuration. You can really get into the weeds here, but essentially this is going to show all the system settings that you can do for each individual console. So for example, under Super Nintendo, we can go in here, and then under like game rendering and shaders, we can change out the shaders just for Super Nintendo games. So you got a lot to work with here, and it really will depend on the system that you're trying to run. And for the higher end ones, it is very important. For example, under GameCube, we can go down here and then change out the rendering option. So I already have it set here to Vulkan and then a 2x resolution, which seems to work the best with this particular chipset. So if you want to do things like upscale your resolution on 3D based systems, you want to go into the per system advanced configuration and do that here. Another thing I recommend checking out within these standalone emulators is VSync. For many different TVs, you will have screen tearing when you first start it up, and that's because VSync will be off by default because it does take a little bit of CPU to run this stuff. So generally what I do in order to fix my screen tearing is I turn this on just to make it look a lot better. It may make the games not run quite as well, but in general I think this chip can do a pretty good job anyway. So my recommendation would be to go into these per system advanced configurations anytime you're trying to make a specific change that really is going to work for that system in particular. You know, for PlayStation 2, another good example here, I've got it set up to be in Vulkan and with a 1.5x upscale. Also in the display section, you can see that I turned on widescreen patches and VSync as well as interlacing patches because I think that's just an easier way to play these games. Now, because I have widescreen patches enabled, that means it's going to fill up the screen and I'm not going to want to have borders on the left and right with my typical 4x3 games. So what I do in conjunction with this is I go up here to decorations and I set this to none. That way, by default, it's not going to show bezels on the left and right. Okay, so that's it within the game settings. Let's talk about the controller settings really quickly. We already went in here and mapped the controller, but there are other things we can do as well. For example, if you need to pair any Bluetooth controllers, you can do that right here. And you can also have multiple controllers assigned at the same time. I've only got one hooked up right now, but if I had multiples, then I would be able to assign a controller to a specific player. So I could set this one for player 1, and then I can go into player 2 and set the next one. And so that's how you set up multiplayer if you're wanting to play like an arcade game or something else. Now, we talked a little bit about user interface settings as well. This is where you can change out your theme, but you've got other options too. You can go to theme configuration and really adjust this to however you would like. So if you want to have, specific artwork or whatever, this is where you can make those adjustments within the theme too. It's a lot of fun to play around with this. Also in the user interface settings, you can go in here and adjust some other stuff, like for example, the screensaver. By default, it's just going to dim your screen, but you could set it up to maybe play a random video once you have your video scraped, which we'll do here in a moment. So I would say this is a bit more of an advanced feature just because you don't have to actually change any of this stuff, but if you want to kind of really curate your overall visual experience, you would do it in this section. Next up, in game collection settings, this is where you can change out, which systems are going to be displayed. For example, you decided that even though you loaded up Nintendo 64 games, you don't want to play them on this. So you can just uncheck it and then they won't show up anymore. This is a nice way to remove the games without having to actually delete them from your hard drive. You can also set up automatic game collections. So for example, those that are two-player friendly or, specific arcade or vertical arcade games, you can kind of go through here and pick them based on basically whatever you want to actually see. And then finally, the last thing I want to talk about before we actually start playing games and testing everything out is Scraper. So this is going to be the ability to add your box arts and videos to your overall user navigation experience, which I think really enhances it. So within here, you can go over to accounts and then add your Screenscraper username and password. You can find this at screenscraper.fr. It's also free to set up. Once you've got credentials and added them here, you can now go over to the scrape section, and here is where you can choose which systems you want to scrape. So for example, if you only wanted to do Game Boy Color, you would go down here to the bottom, select none, and then go back up to Game Boy Color and then select that. So it would only scrape this one. If we press right on the D-pad, we can go into the options section. So here we can change out, what image sources we want or whatever. I think most of these are okay, but I do for image source, I changed this to box 2D. That way it's going to show the box first. Also go down here to the scrape for section and turn on video because that's going to allow you to scrape for those videos, which I think are one of the best parts of this whole process. And so once you have all that set up, you can go down to scrape now and then press A and it'll go through that process. Now I've already scraped my game, so that's why it's not allowing me to do that, but it might take some time depending on the size of your library. This is something that you can kind of just leave alone and then come back to it later. And so this is what it's going to look like once it's properly configured, where we can go through here, navigate through our games, and then it'll show the box art. If we hover over it for a moment, it'll also show a video. So I think that's pretty awesome. Another theme I like is called Canvas. This one is kind of neat because it actually goes up and down. So it's got some verticality to it. So you kind of navigate by icon. And then of course you can navigate your games list as well. So yeah, a really neat way to change out the look and the feel of your retro gaming console. And of course, within each of these, we can go into user interface settings, theme configuration, and make adjustments here. For example, under color scheme, with this one in particular, we've got a bunch of different options. Let's try retro, and you'll see just how different this one looks compared to the other. So yeah, this one's a lot brighter looking, and we can also change like the icons and have them be system icons, or you've got a lot of other options within the theme configuration. So if you get bored with any of your themes, then I recommend kind of swapping them out and trying something new. Okay, now that we have basically configured Batocera, let's actually start playing some games and talk about that experience too. So let's go into the Super Nintendo section. Let's just pick a random game. Let's go with F-Zero. So all you have to do here is just press the A button. You'll get a quick introduction here showing like maybe the box art and the name of the game, and then the game should start right up. A lot of things are going to happen right here in the beginning. It's going to log into your retro achievements if you have that set up. And you can also see that we have bezels on the left and right. This is going to be turned on by default. Now, with 4x3 systems, playing them on a 16:9 display, generally you would just have black bars on the left and right, but the Batocera team has these bezels installed instead. Now, I personally like the look of them, but you can also turn them off. They are called decorations within the game settings menu, so you just have to turn them off there. And so once you're in the game, that's really about it. The other major thing is that to exit a game, you're going to press select and start at the same time. We have autosave and auto load turned on as well, which means that when I press select and start, it's going to exit the game, but also save it at the same time. So now if we go back to F-Zero, I press the A button again to start it up, you will see that it'll go right back to where I was previously. And so that's the nice thing about having the auto load and the auto save setup, is that it allows you to basically get in and out of your games really quickly. Now, Batocera also has its own predetermined hotkeys, which you can see right here. And essentially, it's going to be the same across all of the systems, but the major one is going to be to press select and start to exit your game. But you've got other options too. You can save a save state right there on the fly. You can even turn on fast forward by pressing select and right on the D-pad. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about setting up Steam. Now, the first thing you have to do is just open this up and there will be an option for Steam. I've already gone through and done this previously, but essentially you will press the A button here to start up Steam. And the first time that you do it, it's going to make you log in like any other time that you start up Steam. After all, this is just an app running within Batocera. Now, I've already done all that login stuff, so you're not going to see it right here, but you'll see that yes, after you've got it set up, you will be able to go into big picture mode and then navigate through and then install games into your library. Now, one thing you may notice as you're navigating through Steam Big Picture mode is a little bit of screen tearing, and this only happens in this Steam interface, and I'm not sure why, but when you're actually playing a game, it should be fine. If you do get any screen tearing in the game itself, make sure you turn on VSync. But it is a very easy setup, all things considered. Just go through here and then choose to install each of your games. I've already got a few of them installed right now, and so if I go into my library, you can see that, yeah, I've got 5 right now. And if you are going to use a lightweight PC, make sure that you focus on lightweight games, because not every single game is going to play well. I mostly stick to the 2D classics on my particular system. To get out of Steam, you just press the B button to get into this main menu, go over to Power, and then select Exit Steam. And once you're back in the main Steam menu, you will likely see all of your games right here. If you don't see them, go into the game settings here and then update games list. And after that, you should see them here. Now, once you have these games added, you can actually scrape them as well, but I found the best way to do that is to do them one game at a time. So what I recommend doing is pressing start, go into the scrapers section, and then under the source, I change this from Screen Scraper over to the Games DB. This one in general just seems to pick up PC games a little bit better. So I'm going to select that for now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press and hold the A button while hovering over a game, which brings up this side menu here. What I like to do then is go into the scrape section. It's going to search for the name Animal Well in this case, and then find a game. It might take a minute to actually find it, but after that, it'll show you all the results. So here we go. We've got a couple different game options here. We're going to choose Animal Well, and then it'll download the image and bring it over. Now, the thing about the Games DB is that it doesn't include video. It's just the box art. So you'll get the box art, you'll get a description of the game and maybe some other data, but that's about it. I think it's going to be enough. And so my recommendation would just be to go through and scrape the box art for each of these games one by one. Okay, and then finally, a couple other last minute notes. So number one is if you ever need to update Batocera, you would press start, go into the updates and downloads section, and then go down here to check for updates. And every time they have a new stable update, you can hit start update and it'll start. Now, it'll even give you an indication because you have check for updates on, and so it'll let you know when there is a new one too. The stable versions come out every few months, maybe 3 or 6 months, so just kind of be on the lookout for that. If you really want to live on the edge, you can use the butterfly or the unstable version, but personally, I think sticking with stable is going to be the best way to go in the beginning. And then finally, the way that you close out of this system and shut it down is you press start, then go down to quit, and then go down to shut down system. And that's about it. And finally, one last note. If you run into any problems beyond just what I have in my written guide, there's also a Batocera wiki, which will walk you through everything as well. In fact, you can look up every single system and all the files that it'll support, all the BIOS it needs. All of that is contained in their wiki, so I will have that linked as well. And so there you go. That's my guide on how to set up your own dedicated retro gaming console that you can then plug into your living room television by using an older or smaller PC. And there are other ways that you can do this. For example, there are Windows apps that kind of mimic this experience as well, but I personally like the idea of running a custom operating system that only allows me to play my retro games. And around the $200 price point, you can reliably play most PS2 and GameCube games, which I think is a pretty nice sweet spot when it comes to retro emulation. And of course, if you want to try out some of the heavier hitting stuff like PS3 and Xbox 360, then you can always get a more powerful PC, and Batocera will support those as well. And so there we go, we've got this tiny little retro gaming console that can play up through GameCube and PS2, and a good amount of lightweight PC games too. And it's all wrapped together with a nice navigation experience as well. So hopefully this all was helpful for you. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below. And as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful. We will see you next time. Happy gaming.